This week in CIST 1510, Chapter 8, we're going to look at creating tables and forms. Once we're through with this chapter, you should be able to define the table elements, look at the steps used to design and code a table, create a table with row and data, insert a table caption, style a table for tablet or desktop viewports. Also describe form controls and their uses. To use the form elements and input elements. Create text input controls, labels, check boxes. Use a selection menu with multiple options. Use a text area element, and also create a submit button for your form. So we're going to start off looking at tables. Tables are used to present information in rows and columns. This is very helpful when you're comparing data types, or you need to list topics and details, or if you need to provide a lot of content in a compact form. Forms are going to be used to collect information from their customers. So many businesses will use this to capture forms such as the customer's first and last names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers. As I said, tables compare data or outline a detailed topic, such as a schedule or menu. They're comprised of rows and columns. The rows are a horizontal line of information, columns are the vertical lines. Where the rows and columns intersect will be a cell. In the cell, will contain the data, most of the time for the information about the table. The header cell data is going to display text as bold and center aligned, while the data cells, they're going to display normal left aligned text and also contain information appropriate for that column and rows. So we see an example here of the columns and rows, and the intersection of where they meet, it says the word cell. That is where we would put the information for the column. Now, some table elements that we need to look at for the HTML elements include the table tags, because that indicates that the table is starting and the ending of the table. It's going to contain all of the related table elements. Everything else is going to be placed within that table tags. The TR tags is a table row. It's going to contain the table data cells. The TH is the table header cells, will have the header content. TDs are table data. That's the cell content. Those are going to be placed within the TR tags. Caption will have the table caption. The T-head tags are the table header area, which is our grouped header content. T-body is our T-body area. It's grouped body content. And then our T-footer is going to be the footer area for our tables. So we'll start creating a table. We'll use the table tags. That's going to indicate our starting and ending. Everything else is going to be contained within those two tags. We have our TR tags. It's going to indicate the starting of each row. And the TD tags are going to be the individual cells. That's going to be the table data when in the rows. So let's take a look at an example of this here. Okay, so we have our open and closed table tags. In here we do have a TR. Now we do have a table head that we will look at in this table row here. But we do have the TD tags. That's got our information that will be put in those cells. Because notice that the TD tags have an opening and a closing. That's going to indicate that that is a one cell, and they're all going to reside within that one row. So we can see on the web page here, as we have the table data, and all four of these are within that same table row. Then we go down to the next one for the blue, the dollar amount, and so forth, that we see in our code here. We have green, then the blue, and so forth. So each row is going to have the table data in there. Table borders can be placed around. That's going to be the line that's going to define the perimeter of the table. The table heading is the heading cell. It identifies the row or column content, and it's going to be defined with a starting TH tag and ending TH tag, such as we had in this first row. We had the sponsorship label, dollar amount, and we see on the website that it is different than the text that is in our table data. All right, table captions. That's descriptive text that's going to serve as the title or identifies the table's purpose. You have this, it's going to be defined by starting with a caption tag and then end with the caption tag. It needs to be inserted after the starting table tag. Keep in mind that a table can have only one caption. Now, a table can include headers and captions individually or in a combination. So we see that our caption for this table is our sponsorship opportunities. It comes right after our table tag. And so this is our caption for our table. Now, you do have attributes that can be used within a table. You have the three primaries going to be the ID attribute, and that's going to be used to specify a unique ID for a table when it's necessary. You have the call span. That's used to span text or other content over 2 or more columns, while the row span does the same thing for the rows. The first thing you need to remember is before you add a table, you need to consider whether it's necessary for that web page. You want to make sure the table is used to organize information so it's easier for the user to read. Make sure that it has, you need it for the web page to display the structured list of information. Okay, I'm looking in the project for this week. I'm going to strike a chord to give you another example. For the tables. Okay, in the rental page, you will create the tables. Okay, so in here you do have your caption, table rows we used for this as well. Now, a couple things we'll look at. Also, in your contact, you will be creating a form. We'll look at as well. But when you're creating tables, you want to make sure that the table is necessary for your web page. So, once again, tables, they display data in rows and columns. You shouldn't use tables though to design a layout for a web page, but it is used to organize information, so it's easier for the users to read and useful for web pages to display a structured, organized list. Now you can also, one thing I want to bring up here is when you're planning your table, give careful consideration to the mobile viewport because of the screen size. Take into consideration that your table size, you don't want to get too many columns in your table for the mobile viewport because you want to make sure that you do not have to have the scrolling from left to right when designing a web page for mobile devices. Now, when you're styling table elements, you can go in and specify table style rules for each table element. You can use things such as separated border. So it's a border that's going to be applied to the table elements. By default, each cell is going to have its own border. It makes the table appear to use double lines between each table, a data cell. So you can go in and separate that. Collapse border, that's using a border collapse property. It's a value of collapse, and it'll display the table on a single consolidated border. Now, once again, like I was saying, that can be difficult to style this with for mobile devices. So when you're working with the mobile viewport, this can be something that's difficult to style with simply because of the column issue. So you want to make sure that you look at this in the mobile viewport and decide whether or not the table is easy to view in the mobile devices. The forms are going to be used to create a way for the website to collect information from its user that can either be sent to an email or stored for future use. To do this, you would use form controls. So you'd start off with a form element. You start with a form tag, and then you would have a closing form tag. A couple other things you would put in here is your input control. You're going to tell what type of input is going to be viewable by the user, what type of input is going to be used, whether it's going to be a text, email, radio buttons, check boxes, and other types of options. So when we put the top, when we put the input, we're going to tell it the type. The type is going to then determine what type of input is going to be selected in that form. As I said, we can put the input type, as you see here, is input type set to radio, or checkbox, submit, reset button, selection menu. Do have some different types of inputs that we can choose. Our text input controls, they're going to accept text. These are things where you put your name, dates, passwords. These are going to be called our input fields. Now, each input control is going to have attributes that are used more frequently than others. For example, the name is going to identify the specific information that is being sent when the form is submitted for processing. All controls have a name. The ID provides a unique ID for the element. With this, you would use the ID attribute. And then the value, that's going to be the, specify the value of an input element, but it's going to be something that is varied based on the input type. So let's take a quick look here at a form. So in this case, we got a form. Once again, we're applying a class of the form grid. All right, so in here we have field set. So this is where we're breaking the form down into a group. We'll take a quick look at this form in our contact page for this website. So we'll see we have the contact information and additional information located in the form. You see that we have two field sets. Okay, the first one is our contact information. This is what's listed in our legend. All right, so we do have a label. Labels are the descriptive information about what's going in that field. So in this case, we have a label for our F name, which we'll notice that our input type, that is what we have named in the ID for that section for this input box. So we are tying this label to this box. Where it says first name, that is the information that's going to show up here, be visible to the user. Okay, so then we're choosing the input, and the type of input is text. So this input area, which is this line of code here, will accept text. Once we come down, we'll see the email, which means that this email area has to be formatted in an email address. Same with the next one for phone. We'll see that it is set to tel, so it has to be formatted in a phone number. Okay, to the right, we see that we do have radio buttons. Radio buttons, let me select one from this list of options. And then we have a text area that we can type multiple lines of text on. All right, so once again, we have another field set. We have our legend. When we have our, excuse me, a radio group set, so that these are all in this one field set, so we can only choose one of those options. So common input controls include your text, password, email, maybe a checkbox, select, submit, resets, etc. We see the different types of controls for those input controls. Now, when you're working with text input controls, you have two frequently used attributes. The size is going to determine the width of the control in characters. The max is going to specify the maximum number of characters that will be accepted in that text area. Password control, once again, it's going to provide a text box for the password for a visitor to enter their password. Email controls is going to be formatted in email address format. Telephone number has to be formatted in a telephone number format. Date controls, a text box that accepts a date. A text area control, that will create a text box that allows multiple lines of input. Now, when you use this, if you create a text area control, you want to use a text area element instead of the input element. You got two primary attributes that will set the size. You can specify the number of rows or lines in the text area control. You can also set the width of the text area control as a number of columns. And each column is going to contain one character. We'll see an example of that here. We have a label, and then we have our text area. The name of the text area is feedback, and we set this to 5 rows and 100 columns. Okay, so the width is going to be 100 characters, and you can do this 5 times. So you will go across 100 characters, and you can go down 5 rows. Checkbox controls, they allow the visitors to select items from a list with one or more choices. So each choice is going to have a graphical box that will appear. It's going to be checked. You can either click on it to check it, which will select it, or you can uncheck it. By default, they're all going to be deselected, but you can specify in the attribute, you can set the value of checked equals to checked within the input tag to pre-select a default checkbox. Radio controls are going to limit the visitor to only one choice from the list of options. So each one is going to have a radio button, as we looked at in this form. So each one has one option. Okay, so I can only choose one from this area. By default, all of them are deselected, but I can use the check attribute value with an input tag as well. The select control creates a selection menu from which you can then, the visitors can make one or more choices. What this does, it does prevent the visitors from having to type that information. This is something that could be suitable for when you have a limited number of choices that are available. And what this does, it appears as on the form as a text box with a list arrow that they drop down and make their choices. The submit control and reset controls, they will create a submit and reset button. A submit button is going to send the form information to the appropriate location for processing, whether it's going to an email address, going to a database. So when the user clicks on the form, the name of each control and the value of its data are sent to the server to be processed. The reset button clears any input that's entered in the form and resets the input controls to their default. If you have a web page and you're designing the submit button, the form, you need to make sure that you have that submit button. It has to be put on the website. It is a good practice to put a reset control as well. Okay, we talked about form labels there to identify the type of information that are going to be input or selected to an input control. They use the label element. Now, if you want to make sure they're connected to their controls, you include the for attribute with the same value as the input control's ID value. So we see here on our labels, for example, this one is the label for last name or L name. And you'll see that the input box has the ID of L name. That ties the label to that text box. Now, you do have several different attributes that can be used. Different HTML tags will have different attributes. Not all of these are supported by every browser, so you need to make sure that you test these out. If you use the action attribute on the form tag, that's going to specify the browser's action when submitting the form. That's whether they send this form to a database on a web server or send it to an email. A lot of websites use form processing software tools. This can be available from the web server or website hosting. That will process the form and whether to send it to an email, forward it to an email, or store it in a database. Two types of methods we're going to talk about when we use the method attribute of the form tag. This will specify how the data entered in the form, how to send that data to the server to process. The get method is going to append the name value pairs to the URL indicated in the action attribute. The post method is going to send a separate data file with the name value pairs to the URL that's indicated in the action attribute. You can also apply CSS styles to forms to improve the appeal and the usefulness of the form. So you can do this with tables as well. But same as with tables, consider whether the forms are how they are appear in context of the responsive designs. You may need some more controls to include to collect optional feedback and tablet and desktop viewports that you may not use in the mobile viewport. So in this chapter, we looked at including tables and forms on web pages, creating a table that displays related information and formats using CSS properties, how to use web page forms and form controls, and also CSS styles and format for the mobile, tablet, and desktop views. So once you finish your assignment this week, you should have something similar to this, to where your radio button, a form, and a table in your web page. Once again, tables are defined by using the table tags. You do have table rows, and inside those table rows will contain our table data or our table heads. Forms, use the form elements, and inside of those form elements is where we place the information for our forms. Field sets are going to allow you to break the forms into groups. Labels are the text for the forms that says what that element is used for, such as collecting the first name. We then define the input, and we tell what type of input we are going to put, whether it is a radio button or checkbox, a text area, a text, email, phone. This is where we define what type of information we are going to collect in that form and that form area. Then we give it a name, and once again the ID is going to be paired with the labels for area to tie in the label to the field.